Hey, what's up, Fight Family? This is Contemplate Boxing. Just want to talk about, of course, as we know at this point, Saul Canelo Alvarez has knocked out Caleb Sweet Hands Plant to become the first undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. The stoppage came in the 11th round. In the 11th round, Canelo Alvarez landed a left hook that he had been throwing throughout the night. He was partially landing this left hook at multiple times through the night. Didn't really seem to bother or phase Caleb Plant in the earlier rounds, but in the 11th round, Canelo Alvarez lands a left hook. It very visibly shook Caleb Plant. Canelo then followed up with the uppercut to go ahead and score the very first knockdown. Caleb Plant did beat the count. However, as he beat the count, it did signal the beginning of the end of this particular fight, as Canelo Alvarez did come in and he went ahead and finished the work that he had started. There was a lot of interesting things for this particular bout. Caleb Plant, he did show a lot of defensive prowess. He did show a lot of defensive prowess. There were different times in which, actually throughout the night, for most of the night, it did appear that Canelo did have a lot of trouble landing clean against, excuse me, against Caleb Plant. Now, although Caleb was able to show a lot of defensive prowess, he wasn't always making Canelo pay whenever he missed. He was making Canelo miss a lot, but he wasn't consistently making him pay. Not only that, Caleb would have these moments of inactivity. He would seem to have these lows of inactivity. It would seem like he would have 30-second stretches where he really wouldn't do too much. For Canelo's part, Canelo, he stayed applying pressure even if he wasn't landing cleanly or if he was maybe landing on the shoulders or the arms or the elbows because Caleb was using that Philly shell defense here and there. He kept throwing, he kept applying the pressure, continued to try to outwork Caleb Plant, which in the end did prove very much effective. Very good fight. Very good fight. You have to definitely commend both of these gentlemen. Of course, Canelo Alvarez, he definitely places himself in the history books if he wasn't there already. I believe for most fans and critics, Canelo already has a spot in the history books. With this win, I don't think there's any reason for anybody to keep Canelo out of the history books. So, I mean, he definitely places himself in elite company, the first undisputed champion of the super middleweight division. For Caleb Plant, he showed a lot of potential. He showed a lot of potential in this fight. That sounds weird, saying that he showed a lot of potential, seeing as he was a champion, But one thing that is on my mind in regards to Caleb Plant is, will he grow from this particular loss? I'll give you an example. Um, Across the ring from him, we know that Canelo Alvarez, he stated himself when he lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. That was a good learning opportunity for him. On one end, we saw Canelo. He adjusted his style. He did become more defensive. He picked up a lot of things that Floyd Mayweather had taught him a lesson on, essentially, when Mayweather had fought him. Whenever Saul Alvarez fought Gennady Golovkin the very first time, when he came into the rematch, we saw him make some improvements there. Of course, he lost against Floyd Mayweather Jr. Officially was a draw against Gennady Golovkin for the first fight, but in either case, Canelo Alvarez improved. He went back to the gym and he sharpened his craft. Now, will Caleb Plant do the same thing? Now, yes, Saul hasn't been knocked out. Caleb Plant has been knocked out. But this is an opportunity for Caleb Plant to continue to grow, go back into the gym after he recovers and he rests and he recuperates and sharpen his craft. I did see a lot of potential for Caleb Plant to recover from this and to go further and to actually be greater in his career. Caleb Plant, the way that he speaks, the way that he seems to carry himself in boxing, he strongly believes that he will be great and he's done some phenomenal things thus far. But he can be greater. At least in my opinion, he can be greater. And I think I saw some things in this fight that kind of proved to me that he can be greater if he goes back, sharpens himself, goes back and improves in a similar fashion as how Canelo Alvarez improved after his loss against Floyd Mayweather and his draw against Gennady Golovkin, which, many other fans and critics scored as a loss for him. But in either case, Caleb Plant, he has the potential to do that. For Canelo Alvarez, as much as he's already accomplished, the question is, what's next for Canelo, of course. Of course, there is always the bouts that many of us want with either Jamal Charlo or against David Benavidez. And both of those fights are entertaining. I believe both of those fights are entertaining. However, with that said, with David Benavidez, and this is just my personal opinion, in a similar way in which many questioned Caleb Plant in regards to his experience, how Caleb Plant, he had never faced anybody on Saul's level, which you're not going to see too many fighters on Saul's level anyway. But how many individuals had that question for Caleb Plant, I myself kind of have that question for David Benavidez. One critique or criticism that I had about the super middleweight division is that you had these individuals, your brightest stars in the super middleweight division, that were there, and everybody was kind of waiting on the lottery ticket to fight Canelo, so they weren't fighting very many legitimate threats prior to Canelo actually officially coming into the division and the potential of that lottery ticket being there. Of course, this is boxing. A single loss sometimes can take away, your chance, your ticket to the sweepstakes. So I understand, but at the same time, that's a double-edged sword, you know. So some of these individuals in the super middleweight division, your brightest stars, your Caleb Plant, your David Benavidez, they haven't developed the experience. They haven't fought those fights to develop a repertoire, in which I think that they would be able to use to beat Canelo. If David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez do fight, I would love that fight, but I do think my mind will kind of be very similar as it was with Caleb Plant. I believe that Canelo Alvarez would win, probably by stoppage. I think David Benavidez would show a lot of potential as well, in the same way that Caleb Plant showed a lot of potential. But he won't have certain things in his repertoire that he would have had he fought tougher fights leading up to a showdown with Saul Canelo Alvarez. Another fight, many individuals will probably want to see, myself included. I definitely will want to see it. Definitely would not mind seeing it. Is Jamal Charlo. Jamal Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez. This is a fight that many have wanted for quite some time. I believe since both were at 154 pounds, if I remember correctly. And it's a good fight. It's a good fight. I think both of those options are phenomenal options. Now, if Canelo is looking for more history, because in truth, a David Benavidez fight and a Jamal Charlo fight, that does offer a lot. Offers two more big names to his resume. Historically, fighting Benavidez and Jamal Charlo probably won't be as big as going up to 175 and fighting the champions there. Of course, he's been to 175. He fought Sergey Kovalev. There were some criticisms in regards to facing Sergey Kovalev, especially him coming off of a life and death fight against Anthony Yard and then going straight into another training camp, going back up to 175. I think that there is history that could be made there. There are champions that I would favor Canelo Alvarez against at 175. So if Canelo wants to continue making history, he could go ahead and take that route. I think as good as the David Benavidez and the Jamal Charlo fights are, those are big money fights. You know what I mean? All of us would definitely pay to see those fights. I won't front. I will pay to see those fights, and I'll love those fights for every second of every round of those fights. Um, but I think historically, 175 would be more beneficial. Um, Defenses against Benavidez and Charlo, those are great. Historically, all time greatness, you know, 175 would probably be the way to go. Now, if Canelo decides to do that, if Canelo decides to, not stay at 168, because it's not too often that we see fighters, from what I remember, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not too often that we see fighters become undisputed in the lower weight divisions and remain undisputed and not move up, because of course sanctioning fees and everything, and then constant mandatories. A lot of fighters aren't going to continue to deal with that. They'll move up and then chase other dreams. But if Canelo Alvarez does decide to do that, if he does decide to go to 175 and not remain at 168 for the Benavidez fight or the Jamal Charlo fight, well, I mean, there's still plenty of options for the fighters at super middleweight, to take advantage of. That would be the time for the super middleweight division to do what they had failed to do prior to Canelo Alvarez coming into the 168-pound division, and that's fight one another. Fight one another, gain that experience, add to your repertoires through the wins and the losses, regardless of how they come. And that's one thing that I was very disappointed with the super middleweight division prior to Canelo Alvarez coming into the division. You had individuals who at the time were champion, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, David Benavidez at the time he was holding a belt. And none of these individuals had fought each other. And it seemed like there was no movement for any of these individuals to fight one another and gain that experience and, add tricks to their bag or add skills to their repertoire if they ever got that lottery ticket to fight Canelo Alvarez. So if Canelo decides to go up to 175, that's what I want to see from the super middleweight division. I want to see these guys fight each other. That'll be the opportunity. You know, um, but this is boxing. Unfortunately, politics, egos from fighters and promoters tend to get in the way. So only God knows if we'll end up seeing that. Jamar Charlo, of course, he's still at 160. He's had the invitation given to him to move up to 168 to fight David Benavidez. Uh, we don't know what's happening with Jamar Charlo on that. He's seemed to get a lot of different offers and whatnot for different bouts. Um, but, he's also waiting on a Canelo sweepstakes, it seems, that or Golovkin. But, uh, I went way off track, way off track. Tonight, Canelo Alvarez makes history, the very first undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the very first undisputed Mexican champion. So, huge congratulations to Saul Canelo Alvarez. And, hey, hope y'all enjoyed the fight. And let me know your thoughts. Hey, please hit the thumbs up, thumbs down, and subscribe. Hey, y'all take it easy. Peace. God bless.